The baby's cry cut through the howling wind like a knife through silence. But this wasn't the strong, demanding wail of a healthy child. This was weak, desperate, the sound of someone dying slowly. Mary Veluin pressed her son closer to her chest, feeling his tiny ribs through the thin blanket. Her heart hammered against her throat as she whispered the words that had been haunting her for days. "I can't feed my child. My milk has dried up." The alien mining colony of Wrath 9 stretched before her like a graveyard of metal and broken dreams. Once this place had been alive with workers, machines, and purpose. Now it was nothing but a frozen wasteland where the wind screamed through gaps in the scaffolding like tortured souls. The maintenance crews had abandoned this place years ago. No one bothered to seal the broken airlocks anymore. No one cared that the side passages, never meant for living, had become the only shelter for the desperate and forgotten. The streets weren't really streets at all. Narrow spaces between rusted shipping containers and shattered wall panels, where coolant had leaked and frozen into dirty, rainbow-colored ice. Mary stumbled forward, her bare feet slipping on the frozen metal grating. Each step sent sharp pain shooting up her legs like electric shocks. Her muscles screamed in protest, her calves cramping so badly she could barely walk. When had she last eaten? 30 hours. 40. Time had become meaningless in this endless nightmare of cold and hunger. She didn't belong here. Nothing in her carefully controlled life had prepared her for this kind of survival. As a Viralan fertility caste woman, every moment of her existence had been planned, monitored, and managed since she was a teenager. Her body had been valuable, once worth more than most people's entire lives. They had given her assigned rooms, with soft beds and warm meals, assigned partners chosen for their genetic compatibility, assigned nutrition cycles calculated to keep her healthy and fertile. Her only job was to bear children for the wealthy families who could afford the price. She had been a living incubator, nothing more. But that was before the riots. Before the breeding facilities on Sector 3 burned to the ground. Before she became just another runaway with a dying baby in her arms and nowhere left to go. The wind picked up, carrying tiny ice crystals that stung her exposed skin like needles. She pulled the filthy thermal sheet tighter around her shoulders, but it was too thin, too damaged to provide real warmth. Her old ceremonial bodysuit, the reflective, skin-tight garment that had once marked her status, now clung to her like plastic wrap. The fabric had torn at the hips and thighs during her escape, leaving her skin exposed to the bitter cold. Her long white hair, once carefully maintained and styled, now hung in damp, tangled strands over her shoulders. Frost formed on the ends every time she breathed, creating tiny icicles that clinked together when she moved. She had wanted to cut it off. It was just another burden now, but she had no tools, no safe place to stop. She had escaped with nothing but the child in her arms and the clothes on her back. Everything else had burned behind her. The dormitories, the medical facilities, the nurseries where other women's children had been taken away, all of it reduced to ash and twisted metal. Kane whimpered against her chest, a sound so weak it barely qualified as crying. His tiny head turned from side to side, instinctively searching for milk that would never come again. The stress of their escape, the lack of food, the constant fear, it had all conspired to dry up the one thing she could give him. She ducked under a broken support beam, its jagged edges reaching down like claws. The narrow alley behind the scrapyard was eerily quiet except for the weak hissing of steam from a cracked pipe. She pressed herself against the cold wall and scanned the area, desperate for any sign of an open door, a warm light, a place where someone might show mercy. But there was nothing. Just row after row of sealed workshops and storage units, their owners long gone or too afraid to help a stranger. Her eyes darted from building to building, looking for anything that might offer shelter. A maintenance hatch, an unlocked storage crate, even a pile of scrap metal that could block the wind. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking from thirst and exhaustion. He's just a baby. He hasn't done anything wrong." The words disappeared into the wind, unanswered. Above her head, a security drone hummed past, its mechanical voice announcing, scanning for identification tags. The red beam of its sensor swept across the alley, and Mary quickly turned her body to shield Kane from its view. The drone paused for a moment, its scanner lingering on her exposed skin. No identification chip, no registry number, no corporate sponsorship. In the eyes of the machine, she had no value at all. After a few seconds, it moved on, leaving her alone in the darkness once again. Her knees buckled suddenly, and she caught herself against a supply hatch, breathing hard. Every muscle in her body burned with exhaustion. Her chest felt tight, compressed by cold and fear, until each breath was a struggle. She looked down at her son, and her heart nearly stopped. His lips had turned pale, almost blue. His eyes fluttered weakly, but wouldn't open. His small body, once warm and solid against her chest, now felt frighteningly light and cold. He was slipping away from her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Panic gave her strength she didn't know she had left. She staggered toward the next structure, a maintenance building with a service ramp leading down to what looked like a sealed bay. Maybe there would be shelter there, or tools she could trade, or someone who would take pity on a dying child. But her legs gave out halfway down the ramp. She collapsed into the snow with a dull thud, her body twisting as she fell to protect Kane from the impact. The landing tore the thin blanket from her shoulder, and suddenly her bare skin was pressed against the ice, so cold it burned like fire. She lay there for a moment, stunned and gasping. The snow beneath her began to melt, from her body heat soaking through her torn bodysuit. She could feel the warmth leaving her, flowing out into the frozen ground. Soon she would be as cold as the metal around her, and then it would be over. That was when Jonah's core found her. He wasn't supposed to be there, not at that time of night. He had just finished rebuilding a faulty heater manifold, one of the dozens of small repair jobs that kept him busy and paid for his basic supplies. He was heading outside to dump the coolant waste in the designated area when he heard something that made him pause. It wasn't a scream or even a proper cry. It was something smaller, more desperate, like the sound a wounded animal makes when it's given up fighting. He stopped at the threshold of the rear exit, one gloved hand resting on the metal latch, and listened. The snow outside was deep and old, hardened into ice that reflected the pale light from the workshop's windows. He squinted into the darkness and saw movement under the maintenance ramp. Not the quick, purposeful movement of someone trying to break in, but something slow and careful. The movement of someone who had nowhere else to go. Jonas stepped outside, slowly, his heavy boots leaving deep prints in the snow. The woman didn't run when she saw him. She didn't even try to hide. She just turned her head slightly, enough for him to see the dark bruises along her collarbone and the desperate way. Her arms clutched the bundle against her chest. Her lips moved, but her voice was so quiet he had to move closer to hear her words. "My milk dried up," she whispered, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "He needs food." "I don't." She stopped, her voice catching. "I'll do anything." Jonas looked down at her. This strange woman collapsed in the snow behind his workshop. He wasn't surprised. You lived on Wrath 9 long enough, you saw this kind of thing once or twice a year. Refugees from the inner colonies, escaped workers, people running from debts or crimes or simply bad luck. Usually they were already dead when you found them, frozen solid in some corner where they'd tried to find shelter. But not this one. She was still breathing, still trying to shield the child from the cold, still trying to make a deal that might save him, even if it cost her everything. Jonah's core wasn't a hero. He had been once, maybe back when he was an exosystems engineer working on corporate logistics and atmospheric rigs. That was 15 years ago, before a Cascade failure had killed 3 men under his supervision. Faulty override protocols, they'd said in the investigation. A mistake in the code that he should have caught. He'd taken the buyout, moved to the edge of civilized space, and tried to disappear. Now he fixed broken heaters, salvaged parts from abandoned drones, and tried very hard not to care about anyone or anything. It was easier that way, but looking at this woman and her dying child, he found that he still had limits to how much suffering he could ignore. He dropped to one knee beside her in the snow. She flinched away from him, her body tensing, as if expecting a blow. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice level and calm. "Can you stand?" She looked away, staring at the workshop's lit windows. "If you want me for the night, I won't say no. But feed him first, please." The words hit Jonas like a physical blow, not desperate or seductive, just broken. The voice of someone who had learned that her body was the only currency she had left. "I don't want that," he said quietly, surprised by the anger in his own voice. "I want him alive." Mary's head jerked toward him, her eyes wide with something that might have been hope. Jonas reached out carefully and took the baby from her arms. His hands were rough and scarred from years of welding and repair work, but he held the child gently, like something precious and fragile. The baby didn't protest, the transfer didn't even open his eyes. That worried Jonas more than anything else. A healthy child would have fought, would have cried for his mother. This one just lay still, his breathing shallow and rapid. Jonas turned and opened his workshop door wider, letting the warm air spill out into the cold night. "Come on," he said. Mary didn't argue. She pushed herself up from the snow, her legs trembling with the effort. The simple act of standing nearly knocked her down again, but she caught the doorframe and followed him inside. Leaving a trail of melted snow on the floor, inside wasn't much to look at. It was a low-ceiling garage space, lit by harsh overhead strips and the pulsing blue glow of a capacitor core. Tools lined one wall in neat rows: wrenches, plasma cutters, diagnostic equipment. A power generator hummed in the corner, connected to a field heater that threw off uneven waves of warmth in the far back. A simple cot and a chemical toilet were the only signs that someone actually lived here. It wasn't comfortable, wasn't even particularly clean, but it was warm and dry and safe. Jonas laid the baby on a clean blanket on his workbench and moved to the supply cabinet. He grabbed a sealed nutrition pouch, military issue, high calorie, designed for emergency situations. He heated it quickly in the thermal cradle and turned back to offer it to the woman, but she didn't take it. Instead, she pointed at her son with a shaking hand. "Give it to him first." Jonas met her eyes. They were steady despite everything, filled with a fierce determination that reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten: the willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else. He nodded slowly and turned back to the child. He gently lifted the baby's head and touched the pouch to his lips. For a few terrifying seconds, nothing happened. Then, weakly, the child began to suck. His eyes remained closed, but his breathing became a little stronger. Mary slumped onto the floor, her back against the wall. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just watched her son eat, her arms wrapped around herself as if to keep from falling apart completely. The thermal sheet had fallen open again, revealing the torn ceremonial bodysuit that shimmered faintly under the workshop lights. "Oh!" Jonas looked away quickly and grabbed a thick blanket from his storage locker, real wool, salvaged from a transport ship years ago. "Here," he said, offering it to her. She blinked up at him, stunned by this simple kindness. She pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders. And for the first time since he'd found her, she looked almost human again. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Jonas glanced at the child in his arms, still feeding weakly from the pouch. "Because nobody else did." Mary nodded once, slowly. "We'll leave in the morning. Just let him rest tonight." Jonas didn't argue. He could hear the truth in her voice. This wasn't someone angling for pity or trying to take advantage. No, this was someone who had learned never to trust kindness, who expected nothing from the world and would take only what was freely given. He leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. "Name's Jonas," he said. "Jonas Core." "Mary?" she replied. "Mary Veloin." No one spoke after that. The baby stirred in his makeshift cradle, his color already a little better. Snow continued to melt off Mary's shoulders, forming small puddles. On the floor, her face softened as she reached out to brush Kane's cheek. And Jonas saw something in her expression that the breeding facilities had never been able to break: the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. He watched her carefully, this strange woman who had been bred for a role no mother should ever be forced to play. Now she was just trying to keep her child breathing. 1 hour at a time. Outside, the cold pressed against the walls like a living thing. But inside, the heater worked steadily and slowly, carefully. Something important began to grow in the space between them. Not romance, not yet, but something simpler and more precious. The possibility of trust, the chance for kindness, the hope that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to face the darkness alone. Jonas didn't flinch her breathing. That's more than most got. She went quiet again, but he saw something shift in her foos. Less anger, more fatigue, the kind that went deeper than the body. Sure was Lo's any ability to be angry. I don't have a registry. "Chip," she said. "After armament, I burned it out. They'll come eventually. They always do." Jonas leaned against the support beam and crossed his arms. "Not a lot of patrols in this sector. We're too far out to pour a mater. Still, if someone files a bounty, it'll show up on the mining logs." "Then you shouldn't have helped me," he shrugged. "Didn't ask if I should silence again." Kane stirred, grunted softly. Mary stood, her legs still weak, and crossed him. Shek knelt beside the crate and adjusted the cloth around him. Her hand trembling as brushed his cheek. She whispered something to him. In a dialect Jonas didn't recognize, melodic, quiet. Hess dipped back, gave her space after a while. Mary turned and sat on the edge. Oft cat, the blanket still clung to her shoulders. She looked at Jonas. Her voice was flat, almost practiced. "Most men don't." "Wait this long?" he frowned. "Wait for what? For me to offer myself?" Jonas stared at her. "You already did back there in Thiele." She didn't deny it. He stepped closer, kneeling beside her. "And I told you I didn't want that men say things not me." She studied him carefully, thin-nodded once, but she didn't relax. Not yet. He rose and walked to the cabinet, again pulled out a thermal blanket and a second-floor pad. "You'll sleep here tonight? No one comes through the back door, stays locked." "I don't sleep," she said. Quietly. "Not really." "You will," he replied. "Not tonight, maybe, but soon." Jonas dimmed the overhead lights, leaving only the heater glow. Then he moved to the far wall and settled into an old chair. Nuth cat not beside her, far enough to give her space, but close enough in case she called out. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen to the way Thebobby's breathing changed to the soft rustle of Mary adjusting her blanket. Tough, low sigh that left her lips when she finally laid down. She didn't cry. She didn't thank him, but her shoulders loosened slightly as her body adjusted to warmth. And for the first time in days, her instincts didn't scream that danger was coming. That was enough. Mary woke before dawn, though dawn was a technical term on Velrath. 9, the sky above the mining slum, never truly brightened, only shifted from steel gray to rust-stained blue under the flicker of failing orbital lights. She sat up slowly on Theket, listening. The heaters still hummed softly. Kane was asleep, his small chest rising with shallow, steady breaths. The warmth had helped, his color was returning. The stiffness in his limbs had lessened. Her own body, though, felt like it had been through a war. She winced, flexed her fingers, cold lingered in her joints. Her legs were stiff. Her stomach, though full from the ration Jonas gave her, still cramped with the memory of hunger. She reached for her bodysuit, adjusting it to cover herself more fully before standing. She wrapped synth wool blanket tighter and moved quietly across the room. Jonas was still in the chair, head tilted slightly forward. Arms crossed, not asleep, but resting. His breathing was slow. Even Shesti eyed him for a long moment. His features were hard-edged, square jaw, rough skin from years of work and wind, but not cruel. He hadn't touched her, not once he hadn't asked for anything. That alone made him a rare anomaly in her experience. She crouched near the heater and rubbed her hands close to the vent ring to gather courage, not just to stay to ask. Jonas stirred his isopen. He blinked once, then looked at her without surprise. "You slept," he said. She didn't answer then. "So did you." He gave a faint nod. "Not often, but yeah, in need to clean myself and him. We smell like death," he gestured. "Toward the back, there's a gravity sink, cold wash, only towels in the bin." "You'll have privacy." Mary didn't thank him. She just nodded and moved quickly toward the rear of the room. Jonas turned away, giving her space. She stopped at the crate, bent over Kane, and gently lifted him into her arms. He whimpered once in protest, but settled against her. The warmth of her body and the scent of her skin calmed him. Inside a washroom, she stripped in silence. The cold water hit her skin like knives, but didn't make a sound. She had been trained not to. She cleaned Kane first, with gentle cloth passes, brushing away to read formula and sweat, then herself. Arms, face, thighs. She took her time with her hair, combing it with her fingers, untangling each frozen. Not by the time she returned to the workshop, her skin was red raw but clean. She wore the same bedizuit. There was no alternative, but now it clung to her like armor. No longer a brand of her former purpose. Jonas looked up once, then he turned back to his workbench. "I have spare thermal fabric. I'll stitch something decent for you," he said. "Won't win beauty contest, but it'll cover more than that thing." Mary lowered her gaze. "That thing was issued to me when I turned 17. I was told to never remove it unless instructed." Jonas paused. "That how they raised you?" She nodded. "Groomed, trained, evaluated my cycle charts, were monitored my weight record. Daily they injected hormone protocols when I was 12. First pairing was at 16. No choice, you're just property, a calibrated resource." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Sounds like slavery." "It was slavery," she replied. "We just weren't allowed to say it." A silence settled between them. Kane stirred in her arms. She adjusted him gently, then glanced toward the heating coil. "May I sit there again?" Jonas nodded. She moved toward, idealizing down beside the warmth. The child shifted, then opened his eyes. Pale, lilac-canned, glassy, but focused. She smiled faintly, kissed his forehead. "How oldish?" Jonas asked from across the room. "Almost 10 months. He was born in a birthing chamber in orbit over Darren-6. I carried him full term because I was still in the primary program. After TerraTales began, they lost containment. I ran while I could. They didn't chase me at first. They thought I'd return. When my milk ran dry," he frowned. "Why didn't they come after you harder?" "They don't need to. We die fast outside. Disease exposure, shame. Most don't last 3 days. I lasted for you're still here," he said. "That's not nothing." Mary didn't respond. She watched the flames inside the heater. Her voice softened. "You said last night you used to be an engineer. Why are you here, Jonas?" "You could have been anywhere." He looked up from the unit he was repairing. "Because sometimes you make a mistake that sticks." He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. She understood what it meant to carry failure. He continued working. The silence between them had changed. No longer tense, just cautious. A new balance to people pretending they weren't, slowly becoming a unit by mid-morning. Jonas stepped outside with a repurposed salvage scanner. He needed to check the trade relay for updates, shuttle movement, enforcement scans, local alerts. When he returned, his face was unreadable. Mary looked up. "What did you see?" He hesitated, then handed her the scanner. One of the orbital agents flagged a biological asset marked missing, likely defective. "Your physical markers matched the registry description even without the chip." Her hands trembled. She read her designation code, her genetic subtype, her weight, at last official record. A likely non-viable carrier with 1 surviving offspring. Value reclamation recommended. If cost-effective. She set the scanner down. Knuckles. "White, they'll come eventually," Jonas said, "but they're not in this sector yet." The alert just posted. "Nope, bounty assigned. That won't last long." "No." She stood, blanket falling to the floor, revealing her full height. She wasn't tall, but she held herself like someone prepared to fight for every step. "You should turn me in. It would clear your record." Maybe even buy you off this colony." Jonas shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not selling. People, you're not like most men." He picked up the scanner again, checking their lay. "I was once." She moved closer. Not close enough to challenge his space, but close enough that he noticed. Her expression was serious. No seduction, no Plea, just an unspoken question. "Why me? Why now? You helped me when I was nothing. Said you were never nothing." Jonas didn't look up. Kay didn't need to. And for the first time, Mary sat beside him without fear. Mary woke before dawn thou. Dawn was a technical term on Velrath. 9. The sky above the mining slum never truly brightened, only shifted from steel gray to rust-stained blue under the flicker of failing orbital lights. She sat up slowly on the cot, listening. The heater still hummed softly. Kane was asleep, his small chest rising with shallow, steady breaths. The warmth had helped. His color was returning. The stiffness in his limbs had lessened here on body, though felt like it had been through a war. She winced as she flexed her fingers. Cold lingered in her joints. Her legs were stiff, her stomach thoughtful from the ration Jonas gave her, still cramped with the memory of hunger. She reached for her bodysuit, adjusting it to cover herself more fully before standing. She wrapped the synth wool blanket tighter and moved quietly across the room. Jonas was still in the chair, head tilted slightly forward, arms crossed, not asleep but resting. His breathing was slow. Even she studied him for a long moment. His features were hard-edged, square jaw, rough skin from years of work and wind, but not cruel. He hadn't touched her, not once. He had tasked for anything. That alone made him a rare anomaly in her experience. She crouched near the heater and rubbed her hands close to the vent, trying to gather courage not just to stay to ask. Jonas stirred, his eyes opened. He blinked once, then looked at her without surprise. "You slept." He said. She didn't answer. "Then so did you." He gave a faint nod. "No tofen, but yeah, I need to clean myself. And him, we smell like death." He gestured toward the back. "There's a gravity sink, cold wash only towels in the bin. You'll have privacy." Mary didn't thank him. She just nodded and moved quickly toward the rear of the room. Jonas turned away, giving her space. She stopped at the crate, bent over Kane, and gently lifted him into her arms. He whimpered once in protest, but settled against her. The warmth of her body and the scent of her skin calmed him. Inside the washroom, she stripped in silence. The cold water hit her skin like knives, but she didn't make a sound. She had been trained not to. She cleaned Kane first with gentle cloth passes, brushing away dried formula and sweat, then Herschel Farms face, thighs. She took her time with her hair, combing it with her finger, sun-tungling each frozen knot. By the time she returned to the workshop, her skin was red, raw, but clean. She wore the same bedizuet. There was no alternative, but now it clung to her like armor. No Langera brand of her former purpose. Jonas looked up once. Then he turned back to his workbench. "I have spare thermal fabric. I'll stitch something decent for you," he said. "Won't win beauty contest bed. It'll cover more than that." "Thing?" Mary lowered her gaze. "That thing was issued to me when I turned 17. I was told to never remove it unless instructed." Jonas paused. "At how they raised you?" She nodded. "Groomed, trained, evaluated my cycle charts, or monitored my weight record. Daily, they injected hormone protocols when I was 12. First pairing was at 16. No choice. You're just property A calibrated resource." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Sounds like slavery." "It was slavery," she replied. "We just weren't allowed to say it." A silence settled between them. Kane stirred in her arms. She adjusted him gently, then glanced toward the heating coil. "May I sit there again?" Jonas nodded. She moved toward teasing down beside the warmth. The child shifted, then opened his eyes, pale, lilac and glassy, but focused. She smiled faintly, kissed his forehead. "How oldish?" Jonas asked from across the room. "Almost 10 months. He was born in a birthing chamber in orbit over Darren 6. I carried him full term because I was still in the primary program after the riots began. They lost containment. I ran while I could. They didn't chase me at first. They thought I'd return when my milk ran dry." He frowned. Why didn't they come after you harder? They don't need to. We die fast outside. Disease, exposure, shame? Most. Don't last 3 days. I lasted 4. You're still here, he said. That's not nothing. Mary didn't respond. She watched the flames inside the heater. Her voice softened. He said last night you used to be an engineer. Why are you here, Jonas? You could have been anywhere. He looked up from the cum unit he was repairing because sometimes you make a mistake that sticks. He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. She understood what it meant to carry failure. He continued working. The silence between them had changed no longer. Tense, just cautious, a new balance to people pretending they weren't slowly becoming a unit by mid-morning. Jonas stepped outside with a repurposed salvage scanner. He needed to check the trade relay for updates. Shuttle movement enforcement scans local lowlits. When he returned, his face was unreadable. Mary looked up. What did you see? He hesitated, then handed her the scanner. One of the orbital agents flagged a biological asset marked missing, likely defective. Your physical markers matched the registry description even without the chip. Her hands trembled. She read her designation code, her genetic subtype, her weight at last official record. A likely non-viable carrier with 1 surviving offspring value. Reclamation recommended, if cost-effective. She set the scanner down. Equals white. They'll come eventually, Jonas said, but they're not in this sector yet. The alert just posted. Note bounty is signed. That won't last long, I know. She stood, blanket falling to Theffler, revealing her full height. She wasn't tall, but she held herself like Simeon, prepared to fight for every step. You should turn me in. It would clear your record, maybe even buy you off this alone. Jonas shook his head. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not selling people. You're not like most men. He picked up the scanner again, checking the relay. I was once. She moved closer, not close enough to challenge his space, but close enough that he noticed her expression was serious. No seduction, no Plea, just an unspoken question. Why me? Why now? You helped me when I was nothing. Said you were. Never nothing. Jonas didn't look up. He didn't need to. And first time. Mary sat beside him without fear. The light from the heater was dim and steady, casting long shadows. So long. The corners of the shop outside. The wind had picked up again, pushing snow against the door seams with a scraping, uneven rhythm. It was late, the kind of late where the world outside Thieslums slowed down, where drones pulled back, scanners shut off, and even crime went quiet under the weight of the cold inside. Mary paced. Kane hadn't stirred since midday. His breathing was shallow, lips pale, limbs too still. She checked his temperature with trembling fingers, his pulse with practiced precision. He was alive, but something was wrong. Her instincts knew it. Jonas watched from. He sat near the tool bench, brows furrowed. He's dehydrated. Mary didn't answer. Shed adjusted the cloth around Kane's body, lifting him gently, keeping him close. His stony frame barely responded. I boiled water earlier. Jonas continued, standing filtered. I can add salt tabs, might keep his system balanced. She didn't look up. He needs real fluid formula, protein base. Something his body recognizes. Jonas paused. I've got 2 black market injectors left, medical grade. Use them once after a crash. Might stabilize him. Mary finally turned, her voice sharp. Do it. Jonas opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed injector kit. Expired 2 years ago, but sterile. He knelt beside her, note reaching, just holding it out. You trust me? She looked at her son, then at Jonas. If he dies, I'll never forgive you, she said, voice flat. That's fair. He replied quietly. She handed him the baby. Her arms shook as she let go. She wrapped her arms around herself immediately, as if she'd torn off a limb. Jonas took Kane gently, him close, found a vein in the leg, and pressed the injector softly in place. A soft hiss. The child barely flinched. The fluid entered slowly. Then he waited. 10 minutes, 15. Kane's breathing deepened only slightly, but it was enough. A single twitch of his fingers. Mary let out a breath. She didn't realize she was holding Jonas. Returned him to her arms. Thank you, she whispered, holding Kane to her chest, like was made of glass. Then came the knock, not loud, just one deliberate hit against outer panel, then silence. Jonas's head snapped toward the door. Mary froze. His second knock, slower. Jonas moved fast. He crossed the diffuse panel and collided the overhead lights. Only the heater's glow remained. Then he pulled a slim scanner from under the floorboard and checked the door perimeter. Motion sensors tripped. No ID tag, no heat signature, either surveillance probe. Mary whispered, maybe, or was someone masking a beacon? She held Kane tighter. Jonas grabbed a rusted metal rod and approached the side panel. He eased it open a crack and peered through. Nothing, just falling snow, a faint shape receding in the distance, unmarked, two-legged. Average height gone before he could focus. He shut the panel, locked ether, scanning, not breaching. Yet Mary's knuckles were white around Kane's blanket. They'll be back, not tonight, Jonas said. They don't want a mess. He looked over at her. She stood shaking, not from cold this time, but fear. He could see it. She was used to punishment, not waiting, not being hunted. He crossed to the cot, pulled it closer to the heater. It's too cold on the floor, and your kid needs real warmth. I'm not leaving this spot. He pulled off his jacket, then stay there, but the heat won't be enough. She watched him strip the thermal shirt from his torso. His skin was scarred, hard-built, older, weathered, but alive. Real. Jonah stepped closer, slow. This isn't a past. You need body heat. It's the only thing that works this fast. Mary hesitated, then without a word she stepped forward and let him guide her down onto the cot. She lay on her side, cradling Kane between them. Jonas eased in behind her, not touching her directly, only pressing enough to share warmth. Her body was tense, every breath measured, every muscle breast for something more, but Jonas stayed still, steady. She spoke softly, eyes fixed ahead in the compound. When men got close, it always meant pain, never warmth. Jonas kept his voice low. Then, this is different. She nodded just once. Then, after a long silence, she whispered, I don't know how to feel safe. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to rest. Her breathing slowed little by little. She relaxed against him, not because she wanted to, but because exhaustion overrode everything else, and Kane, in the cocoon of their bodies, gave a soft sigh. He was warming. Jonas stayed awake long after both of them fell asleep. He didn't touch her beyond what was needed. He didn't speak again. But in thought, narrow, dim space with coal beyond the walls and surveillance. Now circling, something invisible clicked into place. Not lust, not love, something heavier, commitment, made in silence, without ceremony, without need for permission. And outside, snow continued to fall over, 9 still steady, the kind of snow that buried tracks and secrets. The next morning came with no warning, just a slight shift in light through the workshop's sealed windows. Faint orange line where day began and night faded. Neither held much meaning on Velrath 9. Mary was already awake, her back stiff from hours spent lying still beside Jonas, her arms curled protectively around Kane. The boy was warm now, sweaty even, but he breathed deeper with a soft wheeze in his chest that reassured her more than silence ever could. She ran her fingers gently over his hair, whispering in the old tongue a cradle song, half remembered, never sung aloud until now. Jonas stirred behind her and sat up slowly, rubbing his foos. He looked down at the child, then at Mary. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He could tell Kane was stable for now. She stood and crossed to the small basin, rinsing her hands with what little water they had left as she moved the torn hem of her bodysuit. Caught on a rusted paneland, she stopped to pull her free. Something hard and sharp tugged back. She froze, her eyes narrowed. Jonas shackled out, voice tight. He was on his feet in seconds. What is it? She knelt and tugged again. This time the fabric gave way. In the lining, hidden beneath a double seam, was a small metallic square no bigger than a fingernail, a tracker. Jonas cursed under his breath. How long have you had that on you? Mary's face palled. I didn't know. They said the soothed biometric monitors, but I thought they were just for fertility logs. He took the chip gently, with a pair off ears, and walked it straight to the heater. Coil with a hiss, it warped and cracked, releasing a wisp of black smoke that vanished into the vent. He turned to her. If that thing activated in the last 24 hours, someone might already be on their way. Mary tightened her grip on Kane. Her breath came quicker. I need to live. Jonas blocked the doorway without touching her. Leave and go where you didn't even have boots. I'll find a crawl pipe. I've done it before, Mary. No, she snapped, her voice cracking. This place is yours. I won't bring them to you. Jonas looked at her hard. I'm already involved. They'll come whether you're here or not. Silence, then softer. I don't want to baby reason someone else loses everything. He stepped closer. You're not. Her expression wavered, and then suddenly anger rose. You don't get it. I was born to be used. I was grown in a lab and raised in a white room. I've spent my whole life being passed between handlers' shoes, smiled while they hurt me. Do you know what it's like to have your body treated like inventory, to be scheduled for sex by people who don't even look at your face? Jonas didn't flinch. He waited. Her voice dropped. I was nothing until Cain, and even then I wasn't his mother. I was just the one assigned to carry him. He looked down at the child in her arms. And yet you ran. I ran because he creed for me. Jonas nodded, his voice low. Then don't run anymore, stay. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fast. Why do you keep giving me choices? Because you never had any. She stood there a long time, breathing, unevenering the baby in her arms like she didn't know whether to fall apart or fall into him. Then she stepped forward. Jonas didn't move. He waited as she closed the gap between them and looked up at him, eyes wide and glassy. Her lip trembled. And she kissed him. It wasn't careful, it wasn't clean. Her hands were shaking, her lips were dry, her whole body pressed against him like she didn't know how else to say thank you. I'm terrified. I need to feel something that isn't pen. Jonas didn't pull away. He didn't push forward either. He let her decide how long to stay there, and when she did pull back, he only looked at her, not judging, not pitying. She looked down, ashamed. I didn't mean to, you did, he said, quiet, but it's okay. They stood in silence. Then Jonas spoke. We can't stay here long. If they're coming, they'll scam the whole district. Mary nodded. Then we move. I know some mean old smuggler who runs parts out of Bay 14. He might still owe me a favor. What do we need to bring? Just a boy and whatever strength you've got left. Mary tightened the cloth around Cain and nodded again. They didn't say what either of them was really thinking. At this moment, the kiss, the closeness, was the first time either of them had chosen to be seen. Not as property, not as broken, but as people surviving together. Second down had started, but so had something else. They moved at first light. Jonas gave Mary a pair of scavenge boots, too big, patched with metal tape, but insulated. She didn't complain. She wrapped Cain tight against her chest with a sling made from old fusion tarp tucked beneath her coat, his small head barely visible under her collar. He slept deeply, unaware of the world shifting beneath him. Again, Jonas loaded a weather pack with water tabs to ration Barzanda. Short-range signal disruptor. The workshop, once dimly lit and cluttered, now looked bare-stripped. Abandoned by intention, he keyed in the detonation code on the manual capacitor trigger and left it armed beneath the floorboards. Iphone came looking. There'd be nothing left to scan. They stepped into the cold together. Mary didn't speak. Eyes were alert, shoulders tight. She kept close to Jonas's side as they took a narrow ideally past the ventilation ducts and maintenance corridors that fed the lower sprawl. The snow was ankle-deep, gray with chemical residue. The air stung the throat. Jonas led them toward a maintenance lift on the edge of Sector 4. Where the plating gave way to foundation pipes and smuggler crawlways. Mary kept their head down, tracking every shadow. She wasn't used to walking freely. Every step outside made her feel exposed, watched. They passed a collapsed cargo bay. 3 homeless scavengers stared at them from a fire barrel but didn't move. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a breath mask and oil-streaked arms, stood and made as if to approach Jonah. Stoppard looked at him once. That was enough. They moved on. The lift groaned as they descended, creaking on rusted cables and stinking of coolant as it dropped in Thellower. Trench levels. Mary's heart pounded harder. Her instinct screamed below was not safer. It was darker, tighter, closer to the old drone rails where patrols passed silently. Jonas keyed open a gate marked in Oaks Core Repair, authorized Danley. Bay 14th. Through here, he said. They entered a service tunnel, barely shoulder-width ceiling. Low, the walls lined with frozen condensation and conwood vines. Every few meters, a flickering bulb gave them just enough light to see ahead. Kane stirred against her chest but didn't wake. Halfway through the tunnel, a mechanical whine pierced the silence. Jonas froze. Mary pressed her back to the wall. What is it? Drone MK6. His voice dropped. Sweeps for fugitives. Biometrics, heat signature voice sprint. He reached into his pack for the disruptor, but it slipped. It clattered against the pipe floor, bounced once. Twice before sliding out of reach. The drone's whine grew louder, closer. Jonas lunged forward to retrieve it, but Mary was faster. She pulled Kane tight, ran forward, grabbed it, disruptor, and turned toward the incoming hum. She didn't hesitate. She hit the activation switch and held it up like a shield. The disruptor flared blue, stuttering. The drone sound changed erratic, its lights flickering midair as it passed overhead and then veered wildly off path, trailing sparks. Mary stood still, chest heaving, arms tight around her son. Jonas reached her. Yausholden, have done that. I'm not here to be saved, she said. I'm here to survive. They stared at each other. Hadn't argued. 20 minutes later, they reached Bay 14. The door was sealed, coated, and shielded with rust-patched armor. Jonas stepped up, entered a sequence on the pad. A pause, then Theodore unsealed with a dry hiss inside. The air was stale. The room was lined with crates stacked from floor to ceiling. A dim yellow glow lit the center where Amon sat at a makeshift console, smoking something sharp-smelling and wearing a dirty exosuit with mismatched gloves. Hellocked up and frowned. Jonas Core, you're still alive. Jonas smiled without warmth. You still owe me. The man stood. That was 10 years ago. You were bleeding gout in a crawl space with a broken air tank. I carried you 2 clicks uphill through gunfire. Yeah, and now you bring a girl and a baby. What the hell is this? Mary stayed back, watching silently. Jonas stepped forward. We need a way out off-grid. Silent. The smuggler squinted at Mary, then at the child. She's cast, isn't she? Jonas said nothing. That's a death sentence. You know, they find her, they torture whole sector. Jonas kept his voice calm. I didn't ask your opinion, I asked for help. The man sighed, rubbed his face. There's an old crawler heading for the outer rim tomorrow night. Cargo, only no records. I can slip you on board, but it's going to cost. Jonas nodded. What do you want? The smuggler leaned in. Your comm relay codes, the ones you stole from that rig back in 18. I know you've got them. Jonas's expression hardened. Those codes could wipe out 6 months of my side work. The smuggler grinned. Then I guess you'll really be starting over. Jonas didn't hesitate. Done. Mary looked at him, confused. What does that mean? It means, Jonas said, we'll have nothing once we're gone. She stepped closer. You didn't have to do that. He looked at her. You did something in that tunnel. Silence settled between them. The smuggler grunted and turned toward the crates. Be here tomorrow, midnight. Don't bring anyone else. They stepped back into the cold as they made their way toward an abandoned supply shack to rest. Mary walked beside Jonas without speaking. For a long time then, without turning, she said, you keep trading pieces of yourself to keep us alive. He replied without pause, so do you. She looked over at him, and for the first time her smile was real, small but undeniable. They had 1 night left, and then everything would change. They arrived at Bay 14 an hour before midnight. The supply shack had been cold and unsafe, but they hadn't slept. Jonas checked the disruptor twice. Mary rewound the sling around Kane, layering an old insulating mitt between the child's skin and the cold air. Every movement felt final, careful, exact. Not survival now. Escape. The outer cargo platform was buried in windswept snow. A crawler transport, flat-bodied, sealed cargo pod, armored canopy, sat idling on a cracked trackpad. Twin thruster fans glowed faint. Red bend frost-coated fins. No lights, no logos. Exactly what they were promised. The smuggler waved them toward the side ramp. Cargo holds pressurized. Just don't touch anything. Tag read. Jonas nodded once. You got your codes. I wiped them already. You'll vanish once the doors seal. Jonas turned to Mary. She didn't look back. She climbed the ramp with Kane held, closing it, hesitating, not scanning for danger. She had already accepted there would be no second chances. They were halfway opened. A shot rang out. A crack of energy, high-pitched, surgical. The smuggler shed. Jerked back as the beam punched through his skull, he dropped without a sound. Mary spun, instinctively shielding Kane. Jonas pulled her down against the crawler body, low sniper south tower. A mechanical thud echoed behind them as boots struck metal. 4 figures stepped from the snow-black armor Verlin emblems. Still visible beneath frostray veil agents, no insignia, no names, their visors glowed faint blue, weapons ready. The lead one spoke through a modulated mask subject, Veluin Stand Downend. Return the child, you are corporate property under active retrieval. Mary Stu Jonas grabbed her wrist. Don't. But she stepped forward, Kane still tight against her. Her voice was flat. You'll kill him, you've already failed your own metrics, the agent replied calm. The child is tagged as a biological asset. You are non-priority. You may expire. Jonas stepped in front of her. You'll have to go through me. The agent raised his weapon that could be arranged, then the sound changed, a sudden burst of static. The whine of a jammed firing coil. Amos fired. Jonas blinked, looked to his left. Mary was holding the disruptor. She had deactivated it point blank against the agent's rifle just as he fired. Sparks erupted from the weapon. It sputtered, died. Jonas didn't wait. He grabbed a metal rod from the crawler supply net and charged. The fight wasn't fair, but it wasn't clean either. Jonas took down the first soldier with a blow to the head, knocking the visor. Lucy moved faster, jading joints, weak points. The second agent fired and grazed his shoulder. Beauty was Mary, who drove the rod into the soldier's knee from behind. A scream, another shot, then silence. The tormenting agents hesitated too long. The crawler's engines roared to life. Jonas dragged Mary and Kane into the cargo bay. The door sealed just as a second energy beam ricocheted off the hull inside the crawler. It was loud, pressurized, quilling clamps. Disengaging, old systems groaning. Back to life, they collapsed behind a crate, Mary gasping, Kane crying, now alive, terrified. Safe. Jonas pulled her into his arms, shoulder bleeding. She didn't let go. Are you hurt? She asked. Only where it matters. He said. She touched his face. This time when she kissed him, it was different. No fear, no survival instinct, just choice. When the crawler jumped into suborbital flight, the jolt knocked them back against the crate. Kane settled between them, finally drinking from a warmed ration tube. Mary held in steady hands. An hour later, they landed on air-fueling satellite orbiting the fringe moon Siren 8. No checkpoints, no scans, no patrols, just a cold, dusty landing bay and the sound of life. Beginning again, Jonas found him a quiet storage room. The walls were bare, the air recycled, but it was theirs. He set up a heater. Mary unwrapped. Kane stripped off the last of her castisued bodysuit and pulled on an old shirt. Jonas had packed it, swallowed her frame. He sat beside her on the floor, back to the wall. She leaned into him. Kane slept between them. I was never supposed to make it this far, she said softly. He brushed her hand with his. Neither was I. They sat in silence outside. No one knew their names. No one tracked their blood. No one claimed their bodies. Inside, a mother, a child, and a Monwo chose to stay had finally outrun the system. They didn't have a future planned, but they had each other. And for the first time, that was enough. 3 months later, Siren 8 midday. The sun on Thefringe Moon was small and faint, but it still managed to warm the landing deck where Mary stood, her back to the wind. She held Kane in her arms, now heavier, fuller. Awake and alert, his eyes still thought soft lilac tracked the sky lazily as she swayed with him, humming a quiet tune under her breath. He'd started to smile more often, now laugh, even that sound, the high unguarded joy of a child, had become the rhythm of her days. Theo here smelled faintly of iron and dry fuel, but the constant sting of frostbite was gone. She could breathe. Her skin, once raw and dulled from exposure, had regained its smooth violet glow. Her hair no longer matted or unkempt hung. Lucine brushed clean over her back, catching the sunlight like threads of white silk there. Room was small but private, converted from an unused shipping locker in the upper levels of the outpost. You've had no windows, but Jonas had mounted a screen that displayed stars, clouds, even sunsets. She liked to sit with Kane in the evenings and watch unfamiliar skis roll by. The door behind her opened with a soft clunk. Jonas stepped out, a full jacket over one arm, grease on his knuckles, and the unmistakable scent off solder and melted polymer clinging to his clothes. He looked tired, but in the way that came from honest work. No more running, no more tension in his shoulders. She turned as he approached, giving him that small smile she reserved only for him. "Done for the day?" she asked mostly. He replied, placing the jacket over her shoulders without being asked. "Scrub the power coils in Section B. They're finely routing clean current. Might even get hot water if I keep pushing." She smirked, teasing luxury. Kane babbled, suddenly grabbing at Jonas's shirt. His fingers had strength now. His cheeks had color. Jonas took him handsomely, lifting him up and bouncing him. "Once you're getting heavy, he eats like yay minor," Mary said softly, watching them. Jonas chuckled. Fitting. They sat together on a low crate by the dock rail. Came cradled between them, wide-eyed and watching the sky. Mary leaned against Jonas, her head resting on his shoulder there. No urgent conversation, no planning, no threat, just the quiet comfort of stillness, of safety. Jonas eventually broke the silence. "We could stay here a while, build something." She didn't reply right away. She just watched Kane, then she nodded. "I think I want to." He glanced at her. "You sure?" She met his eyes. "This is the first time I've ever wanted anything for myself. So yes." Jonas reached into his pocket and pulled out Asmol metal chip. Old worn, a signal tag reprogrammed. He handed it to her. "What's this?" "It's a registry ID faked for you, for Kane. If anyone scans you, you'll show all's registered refugees from Arcees, for no ties, no caste, just normal people." Mary stared at it. Her hand trembled as she took it, not from fear, from relief. "You did this for us, for you," he corrected, "because I want to stop being alone too." She leaned into him this time, no doubt of exhaustion or desperation, but choice that night as Kane slept between recycled blankets. Jonas and Mary lay side by side in the dark, their bodies pressed together under shared covers, skin to skin, no shame, no tension. They moved slowly, unhurried, rediscovering what it meant to be touched without fear. Was awkward at first, gentle but real. Every breath, every motion was made with mutual consent and quiet care. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. What mattered was that for the first time Mary made love, not to please, not to serve, but because she was loved. After she lay with her head on Jonas's chest, the fingers tracing the small swirl marks at her collarbone, faintly glowing, he whispered, "You're not property, you never were." She whispered back, "You're not broken, you never were." They fell asleep in each other's arms outside. Thesters drifted over Siren 8 in silence. And for the family inside the old storage room, there was no need to run anymore. They had already arrived.